Okay, I'm going to say we kick this off. There's officially a great turnout here. More folks are going to make their way in. I want to say hello and welcome to everybody to our second State of the Race covering the Philadelphia Mayor's Race 2023. This has been a really, really fun series to put together. For those of you who I don't know or who don't know me, my name is Alex Hellman. You may know me as the founder of a co-working space in Philadelphia called Indie Hall, the co-founder of an organization called 10,000 Independence Project. Between them, over the last 15 years, all of the work that I've done has really been about bringing together and supporting the independent business community in Philadelphia. And this series is really no different than that, but with a very specific focus on the next leader of the city that I think all of us love very, very much. So I'm going to get into our program in just a moment and introduce our director of advocacy here at 10K. But a quick run through the agenda for the next hour and a half or so. The goal for tonight and for all of these events is to really for some of the busiest people in Philadelphia, folks that are running businesses, running organizations, folks that care about the city, care about this mayor's race, but aren't paying attention to the day in, day out, all the news. What we're trying to do, since we're doing it for ourselves, is synthesize what's going on, synthesize the big movements in the race, synthesize how you even understand who the candidates are and what they're talking about, and make sure that you can be an informed voter in May of this year. So tonight, we're going to be focusing on the candidates, as we always do, giving you sort of the current snapshot of who the candidates are, what we've learned about them, what you should know about them, as well as some big updates in the world of their institutional support. I've gotten a crash course over the last few weeks from Anne about trying to understand the institutional money and support that's come into the race as well. Now that we've got our 2022 candidate funding reports that were due at the end of January. So Anne has done the hard work to break that down into what does it all really mean and what does it mean for us as voters? What does it mean for the candidates who are potentially going to run our city? And then lastly, talk about the strategy that we're bringing into this race and ultimately the messages that we're trying to deliver to these candidates and how us and you individually, your businesses and the communities you represent could be collaborating over the next few months to make sure that whoever becomes the mayor of our city next, not isn't just someone who's working for us, but working with us. That's really the core message of the entire 10K strategy is one of collaboration together, but also with the next mayor's administration. So, real briefly, last time we got together, sort of the centerpiece of our conversation was this candidate scorecard that centered around three sort of core pillars and issues that we, the 10K community, wanted to focus on. And this is not all of the issues. Obviously, there's like life critical issues like gun violence, like education, like cleanliness and safety, and all of these things. This does not supersede those things. But as an interest group, these are the things that we're trying to talk to candidates about, make sure that they're paying attention to. And truthfully, all of these things tie into those major issues as well, whether it's safety, economic prosperity, and so on. And so last time around, we provided this scorecard. And for those who are here for the first time, after today's event, we'll be sending out a bunch of materials, including some of these resources. But we wanted to give you an idea of how we're viewing the candidates, their past history, how they're talking about things, and how we're currently scoring them on these three pillars of supporting small business policy, their track record, as well as attitude towards collaboration, and how they interact with the big business community as well.
Okay. So there were rumors over the past month about additional candidates coming in. And there are two other candidates that aren't really being taken seriously or actually have websites or fundraising. But this is really the field. These eight folks, we have four women and we have four men, each of them with, pre-existing constituencies of political office, with the exception of Jeff Brown. And as I've been going to all these forums and tracking remarks on social media or in the press, everyone is on common themes, particularly public safety, far and away the top thing that candidates are talking about. But collaboration has really broken through. I mean, this website and our emails and conversations directly with the candidates, it was very easy for them to be picking up on the mantra of collaboration. And it's actually a very strategic way for them to contrast themselves with the existing mayor who has kind of disappeared, right? So not only has he appeared to not be working with that many folks, but he's not really present. And so the collaboration piece was a very easy way for all the candidates to say, I will lead through collaboration. And I think that this is an accomplishment for us because typically in a competitive space on a campaign trail, It's all about me, what I would do, what my track record is, what my vision is. And so we've infected the campaign with the idea of collaboration as leadership. And they're all talking about how they will collaborate and how good they are at previous collaborations. So that's what we want. We want the field competing on good things. Education and housing has also come up, but primarily public safety. And then they're starting to roll out specific plans, and candidates are putting them on the website. One of the things I want to start about before I talk about money is that there's institutional support that is still unknown and unassigned. A lot of endorsements are undecided right now, and super PACs, also known as independent expenditures, some of them are in the race, active, but most of them are still on the sidelines and to be determined. So, this endorsements and super PACs are separate buckets of money from what the candidates raise themselves through the tedious task of calling previous supporters, asking them for money. It's very time intensive, but we'll talk about those reports a little bit later. But I wanted to distinguish that there's multiple buckets of support, both financial and field support. Air support. Air is like TV and social media. Field support is boots on the ground, canvassers, volunteers, and the bank account. So endorsements can be heavy or light. You can have an endorsement from a union, say, for instance, the Carpenters Union, which they haven't done that yet, but say they endorse a candidate. If they're super juiced about that candidate, they can max out on their contribution to that candidate. They can dedicate, dozens of volunteers to the field operation of that candidate. They can talk about that candidate in the press, right? There's multiple ways to go all in on a candidate. But a light endorsement would be more like what Oprah did for John Fetterman in the last Senate race, where she just writes a press release or sends a tweet and says, "I'm for John Fetterman." That is really easy for her. So there's a wide range of different levels of heavy and light support from endorsements to super PACs. Super PACs tend to be heavy in their endorsement, millions of dollars, six, seven, $800,000 of money. In the endorsement, public is the point. The whole point of an endorsement is that it is public. It is coordinating with the campaign. It's allowed to do so. And super PACs are often shielded or secret, although Philadelphia does have a good law in place of requiring people to reveal themselves. The donors to super PACs don't necessarily need to be required. And we do have one super PAC in the race now it's called For a Better Philadelphia. Like, who could be against an organization naming that? But we don't know who's funding that. And it's millions of dollars that are being spent on behalf of Jeff Brown currently by this PAC that we don't know who's behind it. Lastly, like I mentioned, endorsing entities, institutions that publicly endorse, they can coordinate with the campaign. Whereas super PACs, on as a condition of being able to spend in unlimited ways, they are not allowed to directly coordinate with the campaign. And there's all kinds of tricks that our board of ethics is hip to that they're tracking on this front. And lastly, some examples: unions and celebrities. They're the ones that do endorsements. Political celebrities, for example, Mayor Street recently endorsed Rebecca Reinhart. Well, that's notable, because it speaks to the cross racial appeal. It was pretty unusual for former mayor from North Philadelphia to endorse a former Wall Street derivatives trader, right? So that was interesting and notable. And John Street can sway people. He's influential to a lot of particularly Black voters in the city. And then super PACs, we don't know all the time who's behind them. It could be a corporation, national money, local money, unions, national or local, or just super wealthy people that want to see a certain person get elected to a major American city. We also saw some self inflicted wounds the last month or so. And political mistakes provide clues to the voter and to institutional leaders. And so, as a lot of institutional support is still on the sidelines, the self inflicted wounds can inform the decision to support a candidate or not support a candidate. So it answers the questions: how does this campaign and this leader handle pressure? How do they execute on goals? How do they withstand scrutiny? So this is a lot like what it's like to be mayor, right? Mayor is a high pressure job. You have to execute, no excuses. You're constantly in the public eye. And so we saw a few self inflicted wounds. But it remains to be seen how deep these wounds will hurt the candidate and how long the public will remember these self inflicted wounds. So, some of you may know that Helen Gim likes to protest things and she likes to be at the microphone. And she was out front of the Union League protesting Governor DeSantis' appearance. The Union League is a very swank membership organization that decided to honor Governor DeSantis from Florida. He has done very controversial and offensive things to the gay and Black community. And she was protesting that. And then a few days later, she went to the Union League for an event as if the protest never happened. And so she owned the mistake on Twitter, interestingly, but has not owned it on Facebook, which is illustrative of the fact that there's so fewer people on Twitter than there are on Facebook. And then the thing with self-inflicted wounds is that if you have enemies out there and you make a mistake, they will pounce. And so there's a group of Black ward leaders that haven't liked some of the things that Helen Gim has done in the past. And they issued a statement that said she's not qualified to be mayor because of this hypocrisy. But then you can also have people in your base that don't really care about that. And so remains to be seen. We just don't know how these self inflicted wounds will affect the candidates. The second self inflicted wound was Jeff Brown's misuse of Michelle Obama. Not Jeff Brown, but his PAC quoted her out of context, edited the video in ways that were clearly out of context, that made it appear as if Michelle Obama was endorsing Jeff Brown, when in fact it was video from many years ago on a totally different issue. Michelle Obama issued a statement asking him basically to cease and desist. The video is still on his website, so I don't know if this is going to go away. He also had some weird white savior comments. So there's some self-inflicted wound there. But again, we don't know how it's going to stick or if his massive amount of money can override it. Lastly, Eamon Brown is on the borderline of not really being taken seriously, but I'm not willing to count him out yet. But he has gotten out of the gates with a couple major flubs on TV, and the Inquirer wrote about his very questionable business dealings, partners that were pissed off. He owes people a lot of money to the extent that they've sued him. So when you're out here running for mayor, there's a lot of scrutiny and it's easy to have a misstep. It remains to be seen how much those missteps will stick or turn into a narrative about poor judgment or deception or whatnot. So those missteps inform institutions of what they're going to do. Nonetheless, quite a few institutions have gotten off the sidelines and endorsed particular candidates, and only one super PAC is in action right now for Jeff Brown. So out of the field of women candidates that you see here, Helen Gim has gotten endorsements and Rebecca Reinhart has scored endorsements. That was the Mayor Street endorsement I mentioned for Rebecca. And Helen Gim has scored the endorsement of primarily the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. And I believe there was one other union that's escaping me. And there's definitely looking at their campaign finance reports and who has given to them lately in the past year. There's definitely future possibility of all of these candidates receiving a super PAC support. But there's some hints, both word on the street and in the campaign finance reports, that all four of these candidates have possible super PAC endorsement and other endorsements in their future. So as I mentioned, a lot of institutions are still on the sidelines. Switching over to Derek, who we just heard from, he has not gotten any major endorsements and there's no super PAC launched to support him independent of his candidacy. Alan Dom really doesn't need super PACs. He is a super PAC. He has written himself a check for $5 million. And he's sort of embracing this mantra of like not being owned or not needing these institutional endorsements. And super PACs often come with, strings attached or understandings that certain things will be delivered and certain boundaries or certain level of access will be provided. Jeff Brown has scored endorsements. His workforce at all of his supermarkets is a unionized workforce. So his workers that have to negotiate their contract have endorsed him. And also significantly, a local called DC 33, made up of largely working class and blue collar workers, sanitation workers, took a vote early in this process and surprised quite a few people by endorsing Jeff Brown, overwhelmingly endorsed him. So that was big news. And then, of course, since the super PAC is already working for Jeff Brown, he will have one in the future. They're not just going to quit. It's in it to win it at that point. Amen, Brown. I wouldn't count him out because he is a law and order candidate, a charter school guy. If he gets his act together with petitions, it is possible, I think, that a super PAC would get behind him because there's a lot of big money people that would get behind him based on his policy positions. So that was really fast, but we want to take questions in the chat. So, oh wow, there are 12 things in the chat. Alex, can you help me out on the chat?
I've got some stuff picked out for us. And actually, before we get into the question, I wanted to draw a distinction between 10K and institutional support in a couple of different ways. And we talked last time, but it feels like a useful thing. One of the reasons that we invited all of the candidates to connect with our community is because we're a non-endorsing body. But I wanted you to speak to that briefly before we jump into the first question, because it is somewhat related.
Yeah, so institutional support is like huge, long-standing organizations. 10K is a baby organization, and really, I can't stress enough, like the fact that we had candidates respond to this is really a testament to this idea that Alex has put out there. Because we're very small, we don't have money to throw around, but a lot of those institutions are big money, and that's why they're institutions. They've been around a while. But we're not going to endorse. We want to play nice with everybody. We want everybody saying that this is the way to go to grow one person shops. We want more recognition from the field. We want more commitment, collaborate once they're in office. So,
Not endorsing, and we're also not fundraising on behalf of candidates. If there's
yeah.
activities that you as a community or your communities or your organizations want to figure out the best ways to support the candidates that you do feel connected to, we want to share what we're learning, our intelligence, our strategies to you, because it's a good opportunity for us to work together. By contrast, for super PACs, can you
Yeah.
define what coordination means in that context and why it's prohibited?
Yeah. So coordinating means that you're communicating directly with the campaign about strategy, about geography that you're engaging, about events, or mostly it's about strategy and where resources would go, like creating the TV ad together, creating the social media buy together. That is strictly prohibited. And the reason that's prohibited is because otherwise, what would be the point of campaign finance laws, right? So it's a problem and it's a head scratcher. I agree. Ever since Citizen United decided that corporations are people too, and they're free to do what they want to do. And so, because the court decided that big money is like big speech, they had to draw a firewall between the candidates themselves because otherwise it would just be a race for, the most money everywhere. So super PACs, that's the one thing that they're restrained on to do with their money. And it prevents candidates from being flat out purchased by big money. And honestly, there's a growing body of research that asks the question, how much does money matter? And we'll get into that a little bit later. The last race in 2007, before Kenny was elected, way back when Nutter won, there was a millionaire in that race too. And he made a lot of noise, but he didn't win. So he spent millions and millions of dollars. And that has happened with super PACs ever since. So millions and millions of dollars do not necessarily buy the campaign, but they're still prohibited from directly coordinating on strategy and field operations with the candidates themselves and the candidate staff.
Great. Given that you pointed out we have 8 candidates, 8 serious candidates, any clues about either alliances or anyone bowing out at this stage of the game?
Good question. No, I did reference that in a recent column where I said the future of leadership is collaboration, and we have such a talented field, and many of them could cancel one another out. And I did call for, a discussion maybe after petitions, but this fundraising report and continued fundraising is one indicator, and the next big indicator is the collection of petition signatures. That's a big indicator because only Democratic voters in Philadelphia can sign a single person's petition, right? So there can be no duplicates. You have to make a choice if you're signing on a clipboard in those 3 weeks in winter. And that tally will really be the next best and probably the best indicator about candidate viability. So I don't expect any conversations about combining talent that is in the field or alliances being public until after everybody shows their cards with the petitions. And that's between February 14th and March 7th. So sometime the week of March 7th, we'll know exactly who has the most juice on the ground, right? These annual finance reports were about the money and donors, but those donors can come from anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. For example, Maria Canona Sanchez, she's Puerto Rican. She had quite a few donors based in Puerto Rico. Understandable. But they can't sign her petition clipboards. So the next big test is the petitions.
Great. And I know we're going to be talking more about ways to get involved in that part of the process at the end of today's session. How big of a factor are unions going to play in this race? How many votes could they represent?
That's a great question. So it's really interesting because different unions have different suburban, urban memberships. They all have money. They could all max out on the candidate. And because Alan Dom wrote himself a check for $5 million, it triggered the millionaires clause, which doubles the max that an individual or a PAC can give. So say, for instance, I had $3,000 to give to one candidate. Well, if I did that in 2022, that was the max for me. In 2023, it's now doubled. And it's the same with the unions and their PACs. So, for instance, if the PFT gave Helen Gim 12,600 in 2022, that was a max. Now the new max is 25.2. So the unions have money, but their members have different inclination to knock on doors or not, or volunteer for campaigns or not. So teachers are really active, but a lot of them live in the suburbs. So they'll come volunteer. And again, it has to do with how much love the members of that union have authentically for a candidate. We all know that a union could endorse a candidate at the top. The leadership of a union could endorse a candidate, but the rank and file may be like, no. So there's a lot of different pieces, but generally, SEIU 32BJ is a massive union of service workers who live in the city. They're in the community and they do have a reputation for putting a lot of bodies on the door. So they might max out and put bodies on the door. The PFT might do the same. Other unions, transportation workers or carpenters, maybe not so much because of the nature of their jobs and what they have going on at SEPTA's massive shortage. So it really does depend election to election and union to union, but there's a wide range. And again, back to the heavy light, sometimes a union's in the middle of an organizing drive with SEIU, for example. They might give a light endorsement this time around. So it really depends on the field and how the leaders and the members of a union are feeling about a candidate. And that determines how heavy or light they support a candidate with money and boots, or just a little money, or just a little press, or some combination of the two.
Awesome. I've got two rapid fires. If you can
Okay.
answer in a sentence, have any other candidates besides Jeff Brown issued statements against the sugar tax? And if so, do you know who?
Great question. So it's the Philadelphia beverage tax. And in the past, Maria is on record being against it. Maria Canona Sanchez, Rebecca Reinhart wrote a pretty harsh report accusing the administration of like mismanaging the beverage tax. And then Jeff Brown threw massive amounts of money and frankly, like some misinformation about the beverage tax. So those are the three that are on record of being against the Philadelphia beverage tax.
And lastly, any whispers of a serious Republican challenge in the general election?
Not that I know of.
Excellent. Brilliantly short. Onward.
Yes. All right, here we go. Now, this next section has a lot of information, and I'm going to fly through it fast, but there's time for questions. Money is important, obviously. It buys a lot of things that the candidates need. And I hate to be Captain Obvious or Princess Obvious or Queen Obvious. Ads, TV, mail, digital, all of that costs money and money can buy it. Top talent really costs money. As I said in the first explainer, Philadelphia is a major media market in a swing state. So it's important to a lot of people around the country that this city is led by someone who is aligned with their values. And there's all kinds of people weighing in on that. And attack ads. When you have people messing up with self-inflicted wounds, or you have surfaced really juicy opposition research, it's pretty useless if you can't get those negative messages out at the critical time. So imagine down the road, this race is down to like a real neck and neck between two or three people. The money in the bank to disparage one of those others that are neck and neck, that also costs money. So right now, all of the TV is very positive. Jeff Brown has TV and Alan Dom has TV because they're both multimillionaires and they can afford it. Not only is Jeff Brown a multimillionaire, he has a super PAC pulling in millions from God knows who. They're putting ads on TV saying how great Jeff Brown is. So money is important and it buys important things, but it doesn't buy everything. It doesn't buy real love and passion for the candidate. It doesn't buy authenticity. Speaking of authenticity, we have a Super Bowl, but all of the candidates are trying to be relatable about the Eagles in a wide range of cringy, cool, great kind of ways. And it's really interesting for me, a weirdo, working on this campaign to like look at like, hey, what are they doing to like make sure everyone knows that they're on Team Eagles, go Birds? And some of it is like not landing. And so that authenticity piece, you can't buy that. It's very hard to teach. Same thing with mediagenics. Yes, you can buy, a video coach, a speech coach, but all of that takes time. There's a learning curve. And then lastly, track record. You've been in office, you've done things, you have prioritized some issues, you've not prioritized others, you met with some people, you haven't met with others, you burnt some bridges, you built others. The track record is not purchased. It's built. And so money cannot buy any of these things. And when I think about authenticity and love and mediagenics, they're very tied together, right? And if you're sitting in a room listening to the candidate, it's really like thinking about how do they make me feel? Like am I more excited by seeing them talk? Am I getting annoyed? Am I falling asleep? So all of those things are kind of interspersed with one another. Now we're going to dive into some analysis. This is the annual report from 2022, all of 2022. So the candidates hadn't even really announced many of them until the fall, but they were raising money the entire time. And so the amount of money they raised, subtracted from their debts and the amount of money that they spent, that's basically important because in January, locking in your contracts with your staff, some basic scaffolding of a campaign needs to get paid for. There needs to be a budget to pay for those basics. And you can see here in descending order how the candidates are doing. So money isn't everything, but it answers important questions. Can and will enough people give money? Are the candidates and their teams able to bring it in? It's very annoying to call and ask people for money. It's very tedious. Can the team reel the money in? Will the candidate be able to seriously compete without some of that institutional support that we talked about? We're just using the term super PAC as a proxy for all that institutional money we talked about before. And lastly, we want to know who raised the most from Philly voters. So the next series of slides, we're going to go really fast, but basically it's this column answering those questions with color coding. Okay. Can and will enough people give money? In my analysis of the campaign finance reports from 2022, the answer is yes for the candidates that are in green, to be determined on the rest. There's all kinds of things that could happen to trip their momentum into a good place, including endorsements, institutional support. Are the candidates and teams able to bring it in? Mostly, yeah. To be determined on Allen because he basically wrote himself a check. The reason I put Jeff Brown as a to be determined is because he's burning money. He is really burning through money. Will the candidate be able to seriously compete without super PAC support? This question's really important. It will shape who is at close to the finish line at the end of March and April. Allen is self-financed. Jeff Brown is self-financed. Helen and Rebecca have raised money from all over the country and many zip codes, and they have a network that has money, a Penn grad and a former Wall Street person. They have a network of money. They will probably be able to make it without super PAC support. And the other three are unlikely to be really able to build big name recognition, get ads on TV, and really make a huge splash if they don't figure out how to get more money through the door, either themselves or with institutional support. But there's a psychology of fundraising, right? Like it's a numbers game, really, psychology and numbers. Like a massive pool of donors gives money at the beginning, and then that donor pool gets tired. So it shrinks, and you have to ask for bigger checks. And Sherelle and Maria are district council people. They've only represented a certain geography. So the more they can get their name out, the more possible it may be for them to raise money from people outside of their existing network. But they have to build their base to build their bank account. And then lastly, who raised the most money from Philly voters? Sherelle Parker. And why does that matter? Because those are the people who can go into the voting booth and talk to their neighbors and talk to their friends and family. And she already has the highest number of people who are willing to do more than just talk about Sherelle Parker. They're giving money to Sherelle Parker. And that's no small thing. That's a big action step, giving a candidate money. And then here's a sample of how candidates leverage their fundraising performance. As I mentioned, Maria Corina Sanchez exceeded expectations. The word on the street was that she would not be able to raise enough money because she had represented the poorest district for so long. She had really, throughout her career, struggled to raise enough to get herself reelected in the council seat. And so she really exceeded expectations, and she leveraged that in a supporter email. Alan is leveraging the fact that he's not beholden to any big super PAC. So he's trying to flip the script on the millionaire writing himself a check thing, which I think there's validity in both sides of that. Like he won't be beholden to special interests. And then Helen had a great infographic on her social to boost up her brand as the candidate of the people. And the numbers are consistent with like people liking her enough to give her money. 2,000 donors, all 46 zip codes, median donations. So she's trying to pull really like that Bernie Fetterman sort of grassroots fundraiser. And she does pretty well, but in the less than $50 amount, she does about the same as Maria or Sherelle in the reports. She has a lot of donors above 250 and smaller PACs and people from around the country. Really great fundraisers, Rebecca and Helen, and they can leverage that. So I'm going to stop there for questions. I see if there's more in the chat, so I'll rely on you, Alex, because I know we whipped through that pretty fast.
Yeah, I'm very impressed to be. We do have excellent questions. I'm going to start out with, for your perspective, what would be the major roadblock that would prevent Derek and Sherelle from raising money?
Well, the first major roadblock is that they're from the same political network, the Northwest Coalition. Sherelle represents Council District 9, and Derek is from there, even though he's an at-large candidate. So they're splitting that, and that's the first thing. And secondly, really, money is about passion and love. Those things that money can't buy actually drives whether or not someone gives. And so it's really very chicken and egg right now. Is the person viable? Are they worth my money? So there's a limit to the friends and family you can tap into. And beyond that, you have to get into an air game that's effective enough to inspire people to give. And so it really remains to be seen, but I think that's the major roadblock is that they're splitting a similar network, similar political allies. And there's only so many people that whip out a checkbook and write 500, $600,000 checks to candidates running for mayor. There's
Right.
a small universe, and all of the candidates are splitting that universe. And then beyond that, Derek has fundraised from around the country. How much passion is your colleague in Chicago that sees you a couple times a year going to have for you to become the mayor in Philadelphia, right? So I think that's a roadblock, and it's mostly boils down to inspiration. So I find that Sherelle is a little more inspiring to listen to on video, a little more mediagenic. Derek's super smart. He's a lawyer, but Sherelle is practically preacher-like. So they have different obstacles in front of them, but they both have the same one right now is that they're splitting the Northwest network of political activists and donors.
So this is a totally different direction, but I think you've done such a great job of teaching us sort of a bunch of different lenses to look at a candidate constituency and all these different money indicators, different lenses for what that means. Do you have a sense of uh, who is or is there a true constituency around Jeff Brown, or is it just that he's thrown the money that he has at ads fast and early?
Both end. He definitely has loyal following. I don't know him personally, but apparently he's a really good employer. I've heard that people go to work in his stores and they stay there. They have good experiences. He also has been really authentic in his philanthropic choices. So he's created friends over a lifetime of both running a business and doing good things with the money that he earns from that business. So his philanthropy very much has built bridges to Black Philadelphians who were suffering food deserts or returning from prison. So, I don't know if it was like some kind of 20-year strategy, but he is really well positioned with his money and his relationships to do well. But he's also had quite a few self-inflicted wounds that are concerning. It depends. Like, if you really love a candidate, they have to make many mistakes for you to turn your back on them. And all of them have people that really love them and would forgive them once or twice. But now Jeff has a couple missteps, and it really is a question of like, who cares about those missteps and how much do they care? So again, he's not just some vanity project. He's done a lot of good work and has a lot of goodwill stored up from over the years, in my view.
So I've got a question from Charlie that I'm going to build on his question. His question is if there's any indication of how much we might see in super PAC money by the time this is all said and done. And I'm going to reframe the question ever so slightly just to get a sense of scale for candidates raising money. Is there an indication of how much money can flow into this race between now and election day, whether that's a dollar amount or percentage wise?
Yeah, I mean, that's not easy to figure out. And a lot of times reporters have to get TV executives to share the cost of a TV buy. So it's very hard to get those figures until well after the race. And it's just estimates. But already with the amount of TV commercials this early, I think we're on the path to really have a very moneyed race because of super PACs that are already at the table. Much more than the numbers you're seeing here that the candidates can control themselves. But just to get a sense of the stakes and how much money is out there, when I was working in the Kennedy administration and we launched the Philly Pre-K initiative, and we knew that one of the beverage tax, the beverage companies and this network of very wealthy people from around the country and locally spent about $10 million to prevent the beverage tax from becoming law. And that was just on one law. And so that's not a super PAC, but it gives you a sense of like how much money there is out there if people really care about preventing someone from becoming mayor or helping someone become mayor.
Great. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more. So I want to grab this one about Hispanic and Asian communities can position themselves to be relevant and influential in this race at this stage of the game.
I think, like any constituency group, showing up at the forums, making sure the questions you care about are put into the queue, sent to the candidates directly. I visited an Asian American event with the North Kensington CDC yesterday. And the business people there, they have groups that focus on very immediate business concerns like drug dealers and addicts shooting up in their front steps. A lot of the businesses were Asian there, so they were partnering with the Asian American Chamber. And so I would say seeking groups like 10K, like the Hispanic Chamber, like the Asian Chamber, like CDCs and civic associations in your neighborhood may get you more traction than just sticking to an ethnic group. Really drill down to the issues you care about. Like, for instance, many civic associations in high immigrant areas, they care most about language translation. And Maria Quinones Sanchez, for example, has been an absolute champion on council and in her interactions with city government of making sure every person who does not speak English understands how to access resources, right? So it really depends not so much on your ethnicity, in my view, as it does the things you care about. So find the other people that care about the same things that you care about and work with them to create a presence at the forums, create a presence on Facebook, interact with the candidates, ask them directly. But just forming ethnic groups is difficult because the city is so diverse and there are so many different issues. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. I don't think that this is an election that's going to be about what we call identity politics so much as it will be about more quality of life public safety issues that affect Philadelphia right now.
I'll go one step further to extend the offer. And we've had conversations with a couple of the affinity chambers, including, I think Javier is here from the Hispanic chamber. One of the things that I've offered to them is when we have the ear of these candidates, one of the things that we really want to do is when they say, give us a list of potential businesses to talk about instead of the same old businesses that always talked about, be super helpful for us to have members of your communities. And that goes for any sort of affinity group if there's overlap in the kinds of businesses that 10K represents beyond the big business interests of the city. So that's a good opportunity for us to reconnect after today's call.
Okay, awesome. So, as I mentioned earlier, advocacy works. Sometimes I've met advocates that they would get upset if an elected leader stole their idea and started talking about it. And I was like, no, 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 you have one. When a person more powerful with more profile is saying the things that you talk to them about and you ask them to think about, you ask them to incorporate, they have to internalize it before they start talking about it. So you have one when more powerful people are saying the things that you have talked to them about. And we are seeing that happen. Last night at the citizen event, Ellen Dom was interviewed for an hour. He must have said the word entrepreneur and technology about 10 or 15 times. He said the word collaboration even more. So this is evidence because before a couple weeks ago, it was all public safety, public safety, public safety. And so it's definitely working. The candidates are responding. And as you saw tonight, they are collaborating. We asked them to work with us on the video, on the unique message. We asked them to cameo. And so there was a response. And we leave the invite open for everyone else to also send us a video message, may or may not come through. And then we'll have another market signal, if you will, about who is willing to collaborate with a campaign that has these issues at the core. And then community and civic leaders are noticing as well. We're collaborating with other advocates, with other groups on newsletters and getting the word out about forums. We're hearing in emails directly from executives from companies, community organizers, fellow chambers, and other politically active groups. So we're breaking into the group of people that really help shape the civic dialogue and shape the politics and the policy of the city. So things are going really well. And there's a lot of ways for you to participate. The more people, the better. It's great to come to a Zoom or show up to these updates, but we want you to definitely register to become Democrat if you're independent. And we know that that's a tricky thing in a campaign called 10K Independence. We're all very independent. But for May 16th, we have to be Democrat, if just for a little bit. So the deadline on that is May 1st. Make sure if you're some other party, give yourself more wiggle room. Do that way before May 1st. March 5th, we're going to have a petition party. Each candidate needs at least 1,000 unique Democratic registered voters to sign their ballot positions to say, I want this person to be on the ballot. And they have 3 weeks from Tuesday, February 14th until Tuesday, March 7th to go get those. And it's a major test of their field operations, their ability to execute, all kinds of things. And it's an intense time for candidates. It's a lot of work and they're in a race. All of them will get 1,000. The question is, who will get 20,000? Who will get 25,000? Who will send the strongest signal to the institutional support players and the press and to the other candidates that this race is mine, out of the way, right? And that's what the petitions are really about. It's getting on the ballot, but it's also a very strong signal about your field operation and who is the real deal, who is willing to sign on the line and put it in writing. I want you to be the next mayor. So we're having a petition party where we will have multiple candidates petitions there for you to sign. That's a Sunday. We'll be there all afternoon. It'll be fun. It'll be social. We're going to invite the candidates to stop by. I don't know. Sundays, like they all go to church. It might be tough to get them there, but we're going to be there and it'll be a chance to talk informally about the latest news or whatnot and put your name on the person's ballot. We may also have city council petition clipboards there. Even though this campaign is not about them, Petition Party has lots of clipboards at it. And that's what we want to do March 5th. March 22nd, we're going to do another one of these with more institutional players off the sidelines, no doubt, more endorsements, hopefully not too many more self-inflicted wounds or negative attacks. It would be too soon for that March 22nd, but we'll have more of this. And then lastly, we want you to go out and meet candidates. There's a ton of events. We're going to curate the best ones and include them on our website and in a newsletter. And then, of course, we want ideas from you.
Before we jump into questions, I just want to touch on two things really, really briefly. One, when we were talking about the 10K strategy working and we're seeing a bunch of these positive signals, there are some things that haven't come across perfectly yet. Right now, all the candidates and some of the ones that we heard from tonight, some others we've talked to, they're very, very quick to talk about the same categories of business that they always talk about. And we don't see that as a bad thing. We see that as more of a signal of, okay, there's still opportunity to educate. And the fact that we've gotten on their radar and other things have gone through, maybe it's about framing, maybe it's about repetition, maybe it's about finding examples, but by no means is at the end of the road. The other thing is about going out to meeting the candidates, and there's forums, there's single candidate events. And if you really wanted to, there's something you could go to every night of the week, multiple things every night of the week. I certainly don't think I could handle it. And I don't know that anybody in the room here wants to either. But one of the things that I'd love to do, and I haven't figured out how to do, and this is one of the asks to the room for people that are interested in this sort of thing, is ideas for how we can coordinate going to those events. If Anne and myself and Opiola are doing the work to find events to go to, in some cases, even finding partners who are running those events who are willing to give us some free or discounted tickets if they're not free events. The thing that I'm looking for help with is finding people in the community who want to go, but if it's just you going to an event where you don't necessarily know anybody and you're not sure you're going to hear from the candidate, it's kind of a roll of the dice. But I figure if we go, even as a small group of 3, 4, 5 people, even if we don't love what we hear, we've got something to talk about afterwards. And so that's something that we haven't figured out exactly how to coordinate. But if that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, this is my invitation to you to reach out to team at 10k.city, and we'll figure out the best way to start coordinating folks. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to throw out there in terms of the active action we can still take in addition to the things that are hitting the calendar going forward.
I just wanted to add, we have these cute buttons and cute stickers. And I was at the event last night and I was talking to some folks and I said, oh, hey, do you want a button or a sticker? And they're like, oh, what are you talking about? Right. And it has the 10K messages on it. And it's a way to start a conversation about what we're doing. So if you come with us, you could wear the sticker and then signal to the room, like, oh, what is this? What is that about? And get some people wondering. And then they start seeing it repeatedly. And then it's easier to say, oh, what is this? And if one of us is there, we can answer them.
Exactly. We're getting close to the hour. So if folks do have questions that we haven't answered yet, I'm going to scroll back and hit a couple of the ones that we
Yeah.
weren't answering in the last session, since we do have time. While
Yeah.
we're answering those, if you want to put 1 or 2 more questions in the chat, by all means, put them in. One of the things that we're lucky with this programming is I get to work with Anne every day to try and understand this stuff. For our work with 10K, frankly, she's the best, not just in terms of knowledge, but in able to collaborate with a knucklehead like me to really get my head wrapped around this stuff. So I feel lucky to be able to work with her, but also to now have this platform to share with all of you and for you to be here with us and take an hour and a half out of your evening means a lot. And it feels really good to us as well.
And I want to thank everyone. 90 minutes is no joke. So thank you so much for hanging out. I'll stay on as long as anyone needs to get their questions answered. And Alex, if you have to go, I know you're in a different country, but the email is there. Just send your questions if we don't get to them. But yeah, feel free to fire some more questions away.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to one from Dan earlier. A lot of our work has been about trying to remind candidates commercial quarter businesses and neighborhood businesses are critical to livelihood, to safety, to quality of life, and job creation. But our perspective is that's where a lot of these candidates get stuck. From what you see, who are some of the most pro brick and mortar neighborhood business candidates that we have on roster?
So I would go back to that scorecard because that was a question I asked myself in ranking the candidates. So the track record doesn't lie. I believe that Maria Conona Sanchez, Sherelle Parker, and Derek have really solid track records for small business. And Rebecca Reinhart was the controller. So she really didn't have an opportunity to pass legislation to make life easier. So we'll send that scorecard back out and you'll be able to see a ranking from 5 to 0, actually, on every candidate, according to what I know about them and their track record on supporting small businesses.
Great. I'm going to make this our last one. It's an interesting one because the question is basically how much do you think that the average voter is thinking about a candidate's ability or experience to collaborate cross institutionally, whether that is within the departments of Philadelphia or even a relationship with Harrisburg, for instance? Is that something that is on the average voter's mind, or are they just familiar with the effects of that lack of collaboration?
When you say average voter, I just want to say that probably no one on this call is an average voter because it's February 8th and we're talking about election May 16th. So your average voter is going to tune in to this race in April or listen to their friends and family that are on calls like this in February and March, right? So that's the first qualifier. The second answer to that question is that the average voter thinks about the things that they care about that affect their lives most directly. So if you're living in a neighborhood that has gunshots all the time and you care the most about getting gun violence under control, then you're going to care about that. It's visceral. And for this race, and because of the polling and because of the murder rate and shooting rate, you're going to hear the candidates talk about that too. But the average voter cares about the things that impact their bottom line, I believe, and their life directly, or the things that move them emotionally, like whether it's the candidate themselves that they find inspiring. There's not that many average voters that are going out looking at how often did this person collaborate. That's the opportunity of the 10K Independence Project. We're intentionally injecting this idea that you need to be a good collaborator to be the mayor of Philadelphia. You need to demonstrate those skills because we're asking you to do it. And our advocacy campaign is working. And candidates are talking about that as evidence that they are effective leaders. Because at this level, mayor, superintendent, president of city council, you can't get anything done alone. If you don't collaborate effectively, your political enemies will be able to block you more easily, and you won't be able to get traction on your big ideas that actually make a big difference in people's lives. So, the opportunity of advocacy and why it's important is because we're the ones saying, before collaboration, show us how you collaborate, be a good collaborator. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Want to say big thank you to everybody for hanging out. And thank you for sharing and organizing all of your expertise. Looking forward to everything that we're building, continuing to work, more interaction with the community, more interaction with the candidates, and everyone who's still here. You'll be hearing from us very soon with follow-up material that came out tonight and beyond.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Have a great night.